The story of Paris is the story of a river. Before the grand boulevards, before the cathedrals, and before the revolutions that would shake the world, there was only the Seine. It was here, on a small, marshy archipelago in the middle of a meandering river, that one of the world's greatest metropolises was born. But the journey from a muddy fishing village to the City of Light was not a straight path. It was a violent, chaotic, and magnificent struggle against invaders, plagues, kings, and eventually its own people. This is how a small Gallic settlement became the capital of the world. Long before the Romans marched north, the area was controlled by the Parisii, a Gallic tribe of fishermen and boatmen who settled the islands of the Seine around 250 BC. They were savvy traders, minting their own gold coins and controlling the river traffic, but their prosperity drew the gaze of the expanding Roman Republic. In 52 BC, the Roman legions, led by Titus Labienus, a lieutenant of Julius Caesar, crushed the Gallic resistance. On the ashes of the Gallic settlement, the Romans built a new city, Lutetia. For 3 centuries, Lutetia was a model of Roman order. Perched on the left bank to avoid the floodwaters, it boasted a forum, thermal baths, and an amphitheater capable of seating 15,000 people, even though the town's population was barely half that. It was a comfortable provincial Roman town, but it was not yet a capital. By the late 3rd century, the Pax Romana was fracturing. Germanic tribes pressed against the empire's borders. Fearing the barbarian hordes, the inhabitants of Lutetia retreated from the open left bank back to the safety of the central island, the Ile de la Cité. They cannibalized their own temples and monuments, using the stones to build a hasty defensive wall around the island. It was in this fortress, amidst the collapsing empire, that the city took the name of its original founders, Paris. As Rome fell, a new power rose. In 508 AD, Clovis, king of the Franks, united the warring tribes and chose Paris as his capital. Under the Merovingian and Carolingian dynasties, the city became a center of Christianity, cemented by the legend of Saint Denis, the bishop who, after being decapitated by Romans, supposedly picked up his own head and walked to the site of the future basilica of Saint Denis. But the walls of the Ile de la Cité would soon be tested. In the 9th century, the Vikings sailed their longships up the Seine. They sacked the city repeatedly, but in 885, Paris stood firm. Under the command of Count Odo, the Parisians held out against a massive Viking siege for a year. This resilience marked a turning point. The city had proven it was the strategic key to the kingdom. With the rise of the Capetian dynasty in 987, Paris cemented its status as the royal seat. The city began to burst out of its island confinement. It developed a unique anatomy that persists to this day. The Ile de la Cité was the center of power and law. The right bank became the engine of commerce and trade, and the left bank, dominated by the church and the newly founded University of Paris, became the intellectual soul of the city, the Latin Quarter. In roughly 1200, King Philip Augustus transformed Paris into a true medieval fortress. He ordered the paving of streets and the construction of a massive defensive wall that encompassed both banks of the river. To protect the city's vulnerable western flank, he built a grim, square fortress with a massive central keep. He called it the Louvre. Simultaneously, the skyline was changing. On the site of an old Roman temple, Bishop Maurice de Sully ordered the construction of a cathedral that would surpass all others in Christendom. Notre Dame de Paris rose from the ground, a Gothic masterpiece that would take nearly 2 centuries to complete, watching over a city that was now the largest in Europe. The 14th and 15th centuries brought darkness. The 100 Years' War with England left the countryside ravaged. The Black Death arrived in 1348, killing nearly half the population. In 1420, Paris was occupied by the English and their Burgundian allies. Even Joan of Arc failed to liberate it, wounded by a crossbow bolt at the Saint-Honoré gate. When the French kings finally retook their capital in 1436, the city was a ruin. It took the Italian wars of the 16th century to bring light back to the city. King Francis I, dazzled by the art of the Italian Renaissance, invited masters like Da Vinci to France. He began demolishing the medieval fortress of the Louvre, transforming it into a Renaissance palace. But this cultural flowering was cut short by religious fanaticism. As the Protestant Reformation swept Europe, Paris remained a staunchly Catholic stronghold. Tensions exploded on August 24, 1572, St. Bartholomew's Day. The city gates were locked, and a royal order unleashed a wave of mob violence. Thousands of Huguenots were butchered in the streets, the Seine running red with blood. It would take Henry IV, a Protestant who converted to Catholicism to save the kingdom, to heal the wounds. He famously declared, "Paris is well worth a mass," and gave the city its first open public square, the Place Royale, now Place des Vosges, and the Pont Neuf, the first bridge without houses, offering Parisians a view of their own river. By the 17th century, the French monarchy was moving toward absolutism. Louis XIV, the Sun King, turned France into the superpower of Europe. He adorned Paris with grand monuments like the Invalides and replaced the old crumbling city walls with tree-lined promenades, giving us the word boulevard. However, Louis XIV retained a deep childhood distrust of the unruly Parisian mob. In 1682, he moved the entire court and government to a gilded cage outside the city, Versailles. For the next century, Paris was a capital without a king. Yet in the king's absence, the city flourished intellectually. The 18th century was the age of enlightenment. In the salons and in the newly popular coffee houses, philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau debated liberty, equality, and the rights of man. The American Revolution was supported and celebrated here. The city was a pressure cooker of new ideas, simmering beneath a lid of feudal inequality. In 1789, the pressure cooker exploded. A bad harvest, crushing taxes, and a financial crisis drove the people to the breaking point. On July 14, an angry mob stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress used as a royal prison and a symbol of tyranny. They tore it apart, stone by stone. The French Revolution had begun. For the next decade, Paris was the epicenter of a political earthquake. The monarchy was abolished, and the First Republic was declared. But the dream of liberty descended into the nightmare of the terror. In the Place de la Révolution, now the Place de la Concorde, the guillotine worked tirelessly. King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and thousands of others, aristocrats and revolutionaries alike, were executed as the city descended into paranoia and blood. Order was only restored by the rise of a young general, Napoleon Bonaparte. Crowning himself emperor in Notre Dame in 1804, Napoleon envisioned Paris as a new Rome. He built the Arc de Triomphe and the Vendôme column, and he reorganized the city's administration. But his constant wars drained the nation, and in 1814, foreign armies marched down the Champs-Élysées. Despite Napoleon's monuments, the Paris of the early 19th century was still a medieval labyrinth, overcrowded, dark, and disease-ridden. Cholera epidemics claimed thousands of lives. The narrow, winding streets were also ideal for building barricades, fueling a cycle of revolutions in 1830 and 1848. When Napoleon III came to power, he decided to gut the old city. He appointed Baron George Eugene Haussmann to modernize Paris. In barely 2 decades, Haussmann tore down 20,000 houses. He sliced through the slum districts with massive, straight avenues designed to bring in light, air, and, crucially, to allow troops to move quickly. He built a new aqueduct system, a giant network of sewers and grand railway stations that connected Paris to the world. He annexed the surrounding suburbs, doubling the city's size and creating the 20 distinct arrondissements we know today. The Paris of uniform limestone facades and slate-gray roofs was born in this era of dust and construction.
The Second Empire collapsed in 1870 during the disastrous Franco-Prussian War. The Prussians laid siege to Paris. The winter was so harsh and the famine so severe that Parisians were forced to eat the animals of the zoo, including Castor and Pollux, the popular elephants. When the French government surrendered, the radicalized Parisians refused to accept it. They barricaded the city and declared an independent socialist government, the Paris Commune. For 2 months, Paris ruled itself. The end was bloody. During the Bloody Week of May 1871, the French army reconquered the city street by street. In their retreat, the Communards burned the Tuileries Palace and the City Hall. Yet, from these ashes rose the Belle Époque, the beautiful era. By 1889, Paris had recovered to host the Universal Exposition. To mark the occasion, Gustave Eiffel constructed a lattice tower of iron. Intended to stand for only 20 years, it was hated by the intelligentsia, but loved by the public. It became the tallest man-made structure in the world. Paris became the global capital of art and pleasure. The Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, Degas, changed the way the world saw light. The Moulin Rouge opened its doors. The metro began running underground. It was a time of optimism, electricity, and bohemian vibrancy. The 20th century brought the mechanized horror of World War I. In 1914, the German army came within 30 miles of the Eiffel Tower. In a legendary display of solidarity, 600 Parisian taxicabs were commandeered to rush reinforcements to the front lines, helping to win the Battle of the Marne and save the city. During the interwar years, Paris became a haven for the lost generation. Writers like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and artists like Picasso and Dalí found a home in the cafes of Montparnasse. But the shadow of war returned. In June 1940, the German Wehrmacht entered an undefended Paris. For 4 years, the swastika flew from the Eiffel Tower. It was a time of rationing, curfews, and the shame of collaboration. The darkest moment came in July 1942, when French police rounded up 13,000 Jews at the Vélodrome de Vierre Stadium, sending them to their deaths in concentration camps. As the Allies approached in August 1944, Hitler ordered the German governor, Dietrich von Choltitz, to leave the city a field of ruins, to burn the Louvre, blow up the bridges, and destroy the monuments. Choltitz famously disobeyed. On August 25th, the Free French forces entered the city. General Charles de Gaulle proclaimed to the cheering crowds, "Paris outraged, Paris broken, Paris martyred, but Paris liberated."
Post-war Paris faced a difficult recovery, but it eventually embraced modernization while fiercely protecting its heritage. The 1960s and 70s saw the construction of the Peripherique Ring Road and the modern business district of La Défense, moving skyscrapers away from the historic center. Presidents left their marks with grand projects. Pompidou built his avant-garde center for modern art. Mitterrand commissioned the glass pyramid of the Louvre and the new National Library. The city evolved into a diverse, multicultural metropolis, drawing immigrants from across the former French Empire, changing the face and flavor of the capital. Today, Paris is more than just a museum of its own past.
It is a city that has survived being burned, besieged, and rebuilt. It is a city where the ancient stones of the Latin Quarter sit just across the river from the stock market, where the memory of kings coexists with the spirit of revolution. From the boatmen of the Parisii to the high-speed trains of the 21st century, Paris has remained the focal point of a nation and a beacon for the world. It is a testament to the human desire to build, to create, and to live with style. As the Seine continues its slow, steady flow to the sea, it carries with it the reflections of 2,000 years of history, a history written in stone, blood, and light.